And for more on the upcoming elections and to unpack the process, we are now joined live via telephone by Frederick Gooloba-Mutebi, who is a political scientist with a special interest in the political economy. We had arranged to speak to him via Skype, but due to the crackdown on the internet, we are unfortunately unable to do that, so we will be speaking to him through the telephone. Good afternoon, or rather good evening, and welcome to the show. Just give us, Frederick, an indication of, first of all, starting off with this decision to clamp down on the internet. What is your take on that decision?
I think the decision reflects the government's fear that opposition groups would have used social media applications to tally the votes and keep track of their own performance at the elections. The government is claiming that this would have opened the elections to rigging, but actually the one actor in this country, the one political actor that has a history of rigging elections and electoral malpractices is the government itself. And I think that in many ways this action amounts to the government shooting itself in the foot, because what it has done is to bring out suspicions among members of the public that this is actually a gambit that is calculated to enable the government to rig elections and produce results that don't actually reflect the way people have voted.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's also a fear that the social media could be used by the opposition to directly target its constituency and its audience to try and sway them into how to vote come tomorrow?
Well, I think it's plausible, but given the context we are in here in Uganda, that is pretty much unlikely. President Museveni, his constituency really is in the rural areas of Uganda, and there are not very many rural Ugandans who are on social media. Mm-hmm. The social media use in Uganda is very high among urban elites, and it's in urban areas and peri-urban areas that President Museveni enjoys very little support. So I do not see that would have been what would have motivated this decision. I think what motivated it is the coming up with this application, internet-based application, U-Vote, which the opposition was going to use to help its polling agents to tally the votes as they were being counted at polling stations. Now, of course, in this country, there is always a lot of discrepancy between the results as declared at polling stations and as declared by the Electoral Commission. So the suspicion, probably not far-fetched by a lot of members of the public, is that this reflects the government's own panic.
Yeah. Because
that if these things...
Sure, you can go ahead.
Yeah, this reflects the government's panic that if this was allowed to go on, the opposition might come up with a result that is really seriously different from that declared by the Electoral Commission, which might then spark trouble if the Electoral Commission announces a result that is different from what the opposition have tallied themselves. I think that would be at the center of the fears, but also the fact that the government is quite adept at engaging in all kinds of malpractices, and this has been common in all the elections that President Museveni has contested since 1996.
Yeah. But isn't it true that even if you do clamp down on the internet and you don't allow that particular app that you refer to now to be in use during the elections, that the party agents who will be at the different polls would have access to those results as they come out from each constituency or each ward?
I think that's true, but as has been the practice in the past, parties have had polling agents at polling stations, but there have been instances where polling agents are chased away from polling stations. There have been instances where polling agents are bribed with lots of money to abandon their observation of what is happening at the polling stations. So what has happened is that the opposition had encouraged their supporters, in addition to their polling agents, to stay around polling stations and, as much as possible, do their own tallying of the results.
Mm-hmm.
So the obstruction of the internet, of course, does leave a lot of leeway for polling agents to be chased away from polling stations and for them to be compromised.
Okay.
And that accusation has dogged all our elections over the past years.
Mm-hmm. Then comes the decision that has been taken by the U.S. Embassy in Uganda that they will no longer be participating in observing the elections because of the applications that they've made. I think only about 14 were granted accreditation, and the U.S. Embassy arguing that won't be enough to give them the satisfaction that indeed the elections were free and fair, considering that they only have a small number of electoral observers who would be allowed to move around the country and observe the elections.
I think that to a very large extent, the U.S. Embassy is justified in saying that the number of observers who were accredited was too small for them to be able to make an informed or to arrive at an informed opinion as to the validity of the poll. And this is again something that amounts to the government shooting itself in the foot again, because the fewer the observers they accredit, the less able the observers are going to be able to pass a verdict that is going to be believable by Ugandans or anyone else. And the question that is being raised now is, why is it that in the past they have accredited so many observers? What is so special about this particular election that they are so keen to accredit as few observers as possible? That again raises questions about the integrity of the poll tomorrow.
And already there is this cloud around the polls, considering the violence leading up to the elections, but also now this statement that came from the spokesperson of the Secretary General of the United Nations, in where it says that the Secretary General further calls on the Ugandan authorities, to particularly the security forces, to show maximum restraint during this period and act according to the established human rights principles. So if you have such a statement just ahead of the elections, what does it do to the credibility of those polls?
Well, that does raise serious questions about the fairness of this whole exercise, because what we have seen has been constant obstruction of opposition candidates, and not just Bobi Wine, but Bobi Wine has been the main target of these obstructions. We have seen presidential candidates being blocked from holding rallies. We have seen them being diverted from the main roads onto small country roads, some of which are hardly motorable. We have seen their agents being arrested and incarcerated. We have seen their agents being shot at. We have seen their tear gassing of opposition candidates and their supporters at every turn. So clearly, the whole process has been compromised by these actions on the part of the government. Now, of course, they have justified them on the grounds that they were trying to compel the opposition to observe anti-COVID SOPs. But again, the government's own agents, the government's own supporters have been holding rallies where they had massive crowds turning up, and the police was not taking any action either in terms of tear gassing them or even obstructing it. So, yeah, that process has raised doubts about the integrity of the poll.
Okay, let's bring
all the other measures the government has taken.